Hi, this is John Liu with Beyond the Breakwater. Today's video is going to be how to add a monofilament weed guard to a finished fly. So when I say finished fly, I'm talking about one like this, right? So it's something that I tied earlier that does not have a weed guard. You can imagine if you went to a store and purchased a fly, typically it's hard to find anything other than bass bugs that have a weed guard already added to it. So in this video, I'm going to show you how you can go ahead and add one to a finished fly with a minimal number of tools. Basically, all I need in order to add this weed guard is some heavy monofilament. In this case, I'm using a triple fish 60-pound monofilament. You'll obviously need some sort of cutter in order to cut the monofilament. And then I'm going to use a UV cured resin. So in this case, I'm using Solar Res, which is manufactured and distributed by a company here in Carlsbad, California, called Wahoo International. They actually use these resins as surfboard and wetsuit repair, part of their surfboard and wetsuit repair kits, rather than specifically for fly tying. And so the pricing is a little bit different, and so it's a little bit more affordable than some of the other UV cure resins. They also have lights like this, which again are a little bit lower cost than you might find for some of the other UV cure products. And incidentally, this will work on some of the other ones like Clear Cure Goo. This kind of a light will not work on tough fly though, because as some of you people may already know, the different clear resins that cure with light require different frequencies. So some cure with UV frequency light, others cure with blue light. In the case of tough fly, it requires blue light, not ultraviolet. But Solar Res and things like the Loon UV Clear Fly Finish and Clear Cure Goo will cure with UV light, and this light will actually work on all of them. The starting point, of course, in making a monofilament weed guard is picking the right monofilament. Like I mentioned earlier, this happens to be triple fish 60-pound test. But I know a lot of you are going to ask for some sort of guideline or rule for picking out monofilament for the weed guards, and the simple answer is I can't do that. And that's because different manufacturers have different formulations for their nylon, and they're different stiffnesses. And of course, as you step up in pound test, so this is 60 pound, if I'd gone to 80 pound, it would be stiffer as well. It's going to be a matter of trial and error. You can use fluorocarbon if you want. That is stiffer than monofilament, so you can get away with lighter pound test. So for example, this is 60-pound nylon. If I were to do this in fluorocarbon, I would probably use 40-pound fluoro. But fluorocarbon is also a lot more expensive than nylon, so I'm not sure it's worth it. Anyway, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to cut off a short section of monofilament for the weed guard. And then, when I first started doing these weed guards, I used to spend a lot of time trying to straighten them out. I would boil them in water, I would pull on them, I would run them through my fingers or a piece of inner tube to try and straighten them out. And nothing ever seemed to work exactly the way I wanted it. What I discovered is that there is actually a simpler way to do this. It's actually pretty cool. And this was inspired by those windshield shades that you get that sort of you can twist and then fold flat and make them really compact. This is sort of a similar concept. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab one side of the monofilament and I'm just going to give it a half twist and then fold it. Okay. Now you'll notice once I've done that it's got a nice bend to it, and things are symmetric. Okay, so keep making sure that I keep it pinched so that I don't lose the rotation in the monofilament. I'm going to go towards the tip and I'm going to take my pliers and I'm going to crimp a V in the end, okay? And what you'll find is once you put a nice crimp in there, that the shape of the monofilament is retained, and it looks pretty nice. It's symmetric. So now when I add it to the fly as a weed guard, I don't really have to do anything in order to make it look nice. So the next step is to actually get the monofilament attached to the fly. This particular fly I chose because I left a fairly big head on it, but it'll work with a fairly small head. The key is that this kind of a weed guard will not work on a really tiny fly. And the reason for that is, basically I'm going to use the UV resin to glue it to the front of the head, okay? And I have to have enough surface area on the head of the fly to be able to get things to stick. Now, in the case of this monofilament, it's pretty clear it should work. It'll also work on various other kinds of flies. This is a traditional 3/0 beadhead whistler. You can see I've added the monofilament weedguard to it already. And this is another one of my favorite flies that I use for calicos. I don't exactly have a name for it, but it's sort of a cross between Charlie Bisharat's Airhead and Jay Murakashi's Sea Habit. But you can see in both cases I've attached the monofilament weedguard to the nose using the UV resin. And you don't really need a vise to do this, right? So what you can do, I'm going to go ahead and just hold the fly. And the way you do that, if you're just going to hold the fly, is sort of simple. I'm going to do it in 2 steps. The first thing I'm going to do is position the weedguard where I want it, roughly. And instead of trying to glue it in all in at once, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little dot of the UV resin on it and then set it. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. Okay, so I'm just going to put a little dot here to lock it in place. And because it doesn't set until I hit it with the light, I can get it positioned exactly the way I want it. I don't think you can see it very well, but what I'm doing is basically going to hold it in this position, right? I'm going to hit it with the light. Okay, so once we get that going, hit it with the light. And, you know, it'll take about maybe 45 seconds or so, maybe a little bit less. Once it's set, you can see it's sort of held in position right now. So what I'm going to do is, it's not exactly the way I want it, but that's okay, because what I'm going to do is now I'm going to move it to the final position the way I want it, and then just add a little bit more resin to it, and then hit it with the light again. So you can see I've got this fairly far back. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more to keep it in position. Lock it the way I want it. You can let a little of the resin go up the monofilament to sort of hold it in place. Once I get it positioned the way I want it, I'm going to have this standing up fairly vertical on it. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and hit it with the light. Now, a lot of people have told me that they don't like the cost of these UV resins, that they would prefer to use 5-minute epoxy. And that'll work for this, but of course, it takes 5 minutes is a lot longer than you think when you're tying flies. Okay, so in my viewpoint, the convenience of having this set up so quickly is a real plus. And then the other thing that you get with these UV resins is that there's very little waste. When I did 5-minute epoxy, it was pretty much, there was always some left over, and it was never, you know, you'd always wind up throwing away some portion of the epoxy that you had just mixed. So some of these things last a long time. I've had this now for about, oh gosh, months, and it's still not even a quarter empty. So I would really encourage you to give these UV resins a try. They're not really as expensive as you think. It used to be that really, to me, the thing that was killing it were these silly little lights, because you think something like this you could buy maybe without the bulb at a hardware store for $3 or $4, and instead you know, you were looking at $30, $40, $50 for the light. So these are a lot more reasonably priced. Like I said, the solar res will actually work on any of the UV cure resins. So check it out, and I think you'll be surprised at the pricing now. So anyway, now you can see the fly. You know, it's got the weed guard in place, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to trim it. So I found the easiest way to make sure everything is symmetric is just to grab it at a convenient point so I get a good marking spot. Remembering that it's always easier to cut more than it is to put it back after you've cut it. So I'm going to leave myself about 3/8 of an inch above the point of the hook. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and clip once, Oops, didn't do a good job of clipping it. Okay, and then clip it again. Okay, so there you go. We've got a 60-pound nylon weed guard in front of the fly, all set to go. Now, there's different ways you can configure these things. I tend to like the weed guards to stand off from the point and hang out a little bit. Oh, like in this case, it's about maybe half a hook gap in front of, higher than the point of the hook. And that's for a couple of reasons. The first thing you got to realize, when I first started using these, I thought, well, this is sort of silly. How effective can 2 pieces of monofilament be? But you got to realize, especially when you're fishing in the open ocean in kelp, that it's not necessarily the point that always gets caught on stuff. A lot of times, it's the bend of the hook, and so as long as you can get the fly to deflect around something, and that's what the point of the monofilament is, it won't necessarily catch either the point or the bend. The other thing that can happen quite often is when you're casting into kelp and you lay something down on a kelp frond, what you find is that it's, again, it's something silly. Like if you put the fly on edge without a weed guard, what you'll find is that the fly laying flat, the point will catch on the kelp. And so the only point of the monofilament in making it weedless is to basically keep the point off the frond so that when you pull it and you hit a little hole, it'll drop through without getting snagged. So you don't really need a lot of protection for the point for a lot of these scenarios with where you'd want to use a weed guard. Anyway, that's it. Let me give you a close-up shot. Okay, so there's the weed guard, right? It's held in with the UV cure resin. I found it to be a pretty useful thing. I've been actually going through and adding weed guards now to a lot of the flies I've tied in the past, just because they don't seem to affect whether or not the flies get bit, even in open water. And if that's the case, then why wouldn't you have it? So that's it. If you get a chance, I'd appreciate any kind of comments or likes that you give on this YouTube video or on our Facebook page. Also, when you get a chance, visit our website, www.btbff.com.